Masechet Avoda Zara, Daf Lamed Tet. The Mishnah mentioned a few items that a Jew is prohibited from eating if it comes from a non-Jew. On the list is V'tarit Tirufa V'sir She'en Ba Daga, minced tarit fish. The problem with that dish is because it's minced and all ground up, you can't tell what type of fish is in it. And if it's a whole fish, you can see and see what kind of fish, if it's kosher or not. But if it's minced, then it could be that the non-Jew mixed in some non-kosher fish into the dish. So that's prohibited. And also, brine that does not have a kilbit fish floating in it. When the professional brine makers would make brine, they knew which fish are kosher or not, and if they made it only out of kosher fish, they would put a kilbit fish floating in it to indicate that this is made only from kosher fish. And one could trust them because these were professionals and they cared about their reputation, and so they indicated that this one is kosher. But if it doesn't have a kilbit fish floating in it, then that means that the brine maker was not careful and could have put used non-kosher fish to make that brine, and therefore that's prohibited also because it might be not kosher. And next item on the list in the Mishnah is chilak. So we ask, my chilak, what is that? Amar Rav Nachman bar Abba Amar Rav, zo sultanit umipnei ma'asura mipnei she'arbona ole ima. Rav Nachman bar Abba, in the name of Rav, says that chilak is a sultanit fish, which is a small kosher fish. When it's very young, it doesn't yet have scales. The scales develop later on. Now, it is kosher fish. The problem is that when you catch it, one catches it together with other little fish that are not kosher. And so, because it's intermingled together with other fish, and it's hard to tell them apart, therefore, they are prohibited. Tenor banan. En lo achshav ve'atid legadel achar zeman, kegon asultanit ve'afit hareze mutar. A Braita talks about this type of fish and says, if a fish does not have scales now, but it will have scales as it grows up, like the sultanit fish and the afitz fish, those are permitted, those are kosher. So if you can tell what it is, then it is kosher. But if it's a whole mixture, then they're mixed up with non-kosher fish. That's what we said is prohibited. Yesh lo achshav ve'atid lehashir b'sha'a she'oleh min hayam, kegon akunas ve'afunas, ketasfatias ve'achsaftias ve'otanas mutar. And also, if it has scales now, but it sheds the scales when you remove it from the water, for example, these types of fish, akunas, afunas, and this one, might be identified as a swordfish. And in fact, a swordfish, if you take it out of the water, the scales fall away. Are swordfish actually kosher nowadays? I asked my brother-in-law, the fisherman, and he said there are different types of swordfish, so you have to be careful. And some are kosher, some are not kosher, depending on the details. And furthermore, otanas, that's probably a type of tuna over here. So because they have scales, even if they fall off, it's permitted. So either way is permitted, as long as it has scales at some point, even if it develops scales later, or it had scales but it loses them. Either way, they're kosher. Achriz Rabbi Abu bekesari, kirbe dagim ve'ubbaran nikachin mikol adam, chezkatan enam ba'im ela mi pilusa ve'aspamia. Ki hada marabaye, hai sachanta debab nahara sharia. Rabbi Abu, he was the rabbi in Caesarea, and he announced there that fish entrails and their eggs you can buy from anyone, because we can presume that they came from Pelusium and Spain, and non-kosher fish are not found in those areas, and therefore you can buy these from any person that's coming from those places. And this announcement is similar to something that Abaye said in a different place, that small fish from the Bav River are permitted. There's only kosher fish in that river, and therefore you can eat anything that comes from that river. My ta'ama. Now, why is that true, that there's only kosher fish in that river? Ilama mishum de redife maya, v'hai dag tameh, kevan de let hut hashidra beduchta de redife maya lamase ka'eh, v'ha kachazena de ka'eh. So why is it, if you say that this river flows rapidly, and non-kosher fish, because they don't have a spine, they cannot swim, they cannot live in a place that has this rapidly flowing water. Maybe that's the reason, but that's not true because we do see that non-kosher fish do exist even in rivers that have strong currents. So that's just not factually true. Let's try another hypothesis. Maybe because it's salt water. And maybe because it's salt water and non-kosher fish do not have scales, they cannot live in the salt water. But let's test that out, and we see that's not true. There are other bodies of salt water that have non-kosher fish in them, so that can't be the reason. Ela mishum de lamar betina dag tameh amaravina haidana deha deka shafchi ben nehar goza unahar gamda asire. Ravina says that nowadays that law of Abaye does not apply. Ravina lives a couple of generations after Abaye. Says yes, in Abaye's time there were no non-kosher fish in the Bav River, but nowadays the Goza River and the Gamda River spill into the Bav River and bring with it non-kosher fish into that river. And so nowadays you cannot rely on this leniency that all the fish in the Bav River are kosher. Amar Abaye, Hai chamra diyama shareh, Torah diyama asir, v'simanech tameh tahor, tahor tameh. Abaye says that there is a fish called the sea donkey that is kosher, but the sea ox is not kosher. Here's something called the sea donkey. And how do you remember which one is which? Well, you can remember that the one that is tameh is tahor, meaning the one that the land animal is tameh. Hamor, a donkey, is a non-kosher animal, but the sea donkey is kosher. An ox on land is a kosher animal, but the sea ox is not kosher. Amar Rav Asher, Shefar nuna shareh, kedash nuna asiv, semanech kodesh la Hashem. Rav Asher says that a fish called the Shefar nuna is kosher, but a Kedash nuna is not kosher. And you can remember that because the Kedash sounds like Kodesh, and this would be Kodesh. This is holy to Hashem, meaning it's prohibited to human beings. Anything that's sanctified is you cannot eat. And so that's the Kedash nuna. Ika de Amri Kevar nuna asur v'simane kibrei goyim. A different version of Rav Asher's statement. It says that he was ruling on a fish called Kevar nuna is prohibited. And remember that because the mnemonic of graves of Gentiles, and so that is that's tameh, and therefore this fish also is not kosher. Rabbi Akiva ikla leginzak. Aitula kamahu nuna davada melechipusha chayfe bedikula chaza be kalfe v'sharieh. Now we're going to have a number of stories of rabbis who were asked about certain fish, whether they're kosher or not, and we see that what they have in common is that the rabbis don't want to just be machmir and say, I don't know what it is, just don't eat it, but rather they were experts in knowing the different species of fish and went out of their way to try to prove that it was kosher. So Rabbi Akiva, he went to a place called Ginzak, and they brought him a fish that was similar to a chipusha, which is not kosher. But what he did is he put it in a basket, and he looked at it carefully and saw that it had scales, even though they shed when it was trying to escape the basket. But it did have scales, so therefore he said it's kosher. Rav Asher ikla letam durya, aitula kameahu nuna davada melis lofha. Rav Asher went to this place, Tam Durya, and they brought him a fish that looked like an eel, which is not kosher. Naktela de yoma, chazada be simche v'sharieh. But he took it out into the daylight, sunlight, and he saw it has scales, so he permitted it. You can't just look at it quickly. You have to examine it very carefully. Rav Asher ikla lahu atra, aitula kamenuna dave dame lishfarnuna. Rav Asher went to a certain place, and they brought him a fish that looked like a shefarnuna, which is not kosher. Chayfe bim shichle chivare chazabe kalfe ve'sharieh. What he did is he put it in a white vessel, and he saw that it shed dark scales. And so he needed to put it in something white in order to see the contrast between the white vessel and the darker scales. So they were hard to see, but it did have scales, and therefore it's kosher. Rabba bar Chana ikla le'akra de'agma keribu le'sachanta shema'elahu gabra dehava kari le'bate. But now a counterexample where you have to be careful with things that might seem kosher or not. And Abba bar Chana went to a place called Akra de'agma, and they brought him this sachanta dish that's made of small fish, and he heard someone call it bate. Bate is a reference to a non-kosher fish, like a stingray, and he said, since he called it bate, it must be it has non-kosher fish in it. So he said, I'm not going to eat this. Amar middekab kare le bate shma mina davar tameh itbe la achal mineh. Since someone is calling it bate, must be there's some non-kosher fish in it. He didn't eat it. Lesafra yen ba ashkach be davar tameh kare nafshe lo yeuneh lesadik kol aven. So in the morning, when he could see better, he looked carefully and he saw, in fact, that there was non-kosher ingredients in it. And he quoted the pasuk, no sin shall befall the righteous, because he was righteous and careful and was paying attention. He heard what someone said, so that's how he was able to figure out that he should stay away from it. The Mishnah goes on and says a sliver of chiltit. A chiltit is a very strong herb, and a sliver of it that you cut with a knife, non-Jew cuts with a knife, is prohibited. And so the herb itself obviously is kosher, it's just an herb. And if you would cut it with a kosher knife, also it would be okay. But if you cut it with a non-kosher knife, that's the problem. Then some of the taste from the non-kosher knife will go into it. And even though we learned the opinion that says something that gives a bad taste is permitted, and you can assume that the knife was not used for 24 hours and any taste that was in it would be okay. You're cutting it cold, by the way, but because of the pressure of the knife, even though it's cold, it's possible that some of the fat or grease or whatever is stuck on the knife will, through that pressure, be absorbed into the thing that you're cutting. Now, even though it would give a bad taste if it was after a while, but because this chiltit is so sharp, it actually sweetens the taste of the grease that's on the knife, and therefore it becomes like noten tam leshevach, would give a good taste, and that's why it's prohibited. So there's a particular chumrah regarding a knife with a sharp food. So sharp knife and also sharp tasting food, and this applies not only to a non-kosher knife, but even to a meat or dairy knife, like cutting an onion or something sharp with a meat knife would actually cause the layer of the onion to become meat, which is a halacha until today. Abdeh de Rabbi Levi havaka mizaben chiltita. Kinach nafshe de Rabbi Levi atula kamed Rabbi Yochanan amru le ma'ul mizban mine amalu abdo shel chaver harehu kechaver. The servant of Rabbi Levi was selling this chiltit. And because it was Rabbi Levi, so Rabbi Levi makes sure that everybody in his household, his servant, is doing the right thing, and so he keeps a kosher home. So one was able to still buy the chiltit from them, from Rabbi Levi, when Rabbi Levi was alive, even though the slave was preparing it. That's okay. But then when Rabbi Levi died, his servant was still preparing this chiltit. So they came to Rabbi Yochanan and asked him, can we still buy from the servant? He's not Jewish, but he knows how to do it, because when Rabbi Levi was alive, he had kept a kosher kitchen. So can we still trust him? Amarlu avdo shel chaver harehu kechaver. And he says the slave of a chaver is also like a chaver. Rabbi Levi, chaver means someone that's in a circle of trust, that you know that they keep the laws very meticulously, and the servants, the chaver, is going to make sure that his servant knows all the rules to do correctly. And so, yes, you can trust him even after that. A lot of times we find a housekeeper that was in an observant home, and they go to a different home, but they know all the laws, and they even tell their new bosses, oh, you're not allowed to do that. So, right, they can learn all the laws and do them with a lot of responsibility. Rav Huna bar Yomi zeban Techelet me'anshe debete Rav Amram chasida ata lekamed Rav Yosef lahava bideh. And now another story, not about kosher food, but about Techelet. We see that still during the time of the Amoraim in Bavel, they still were preparing and buying Techelet to put on their sisit. But it's not an easy process. You have to know how to get it from the snail and how to prepare it in the right way. And only a few people are experts in doing that. And it's easy to counterfeit, because someone could just get some other blue that kind of looks the same and is much cheaper and is not the right one. So you have to buy Techelet from someone who's trustworthy, that is getting it from the proper source and preparing it the right way. So Rav Huna bar Yomi, he would buy Techelet from the wife of Rav Amram Chasida, and he didn't know, is she trustworthy? Apparently Rav Amram already died, and so can we trust her? So Rav Huna came to Rav Yosef, can I trust her? And Rav Yosef says, I don't know. He didn't have the answer. Bagabe Hanan Hayata. And then Rav Huna happened to meet Hanan the tailor. Amar le Yosef Aniya Mina le. So who'd you ask? Rav Yosef? Poor Rav Yosef. He doesn't know. Rav Yosef, when he was older, forgot his learning. And so that's why he forgot. He didn't know the answer. He says, but you bet the right person. I know the answer. Biditi hava Avoda. Dizbini Techelta Menche de Betet Rabbena'a. Achud de Rabbi Chia bar Abba. I had a situation where I bought Techelet from the people, the household of, meaning the wife of Rabbena'a, the brother of Rabbi Chia bar Abba. And I didn't know if it was kosher or not. I asked Rab Matana, can I buy it from her? He says, I don't know. And I came to Rav Yehuda Mehagronya, and he said, oh, you came to the right place, you fall into my hand, it's hashgacha, because I know the answer. I happen to hear this statement from Shemuel. He said the wife of a chaver is like a chaver herself. And because she was married to a great sage who was trustworthy, yes, you can trust her as well, and you can buy that techelet, so therefore, yes, it's permitted. Tanena leha. We have a baraita that supports what we just learned. Detunaban eshet chaver harehi kechaver, avdo shel chaver hareu kechaver, chaver shemet, ishto banav bnei beto harehen bechezkatan, ad sheyechashdu. The wife of a chaver has the same status as a chaver. The servant of a chaver has also the same status as a chaver. That's talking about while the chaver is alive. The chaver is going to make sure that all of his household are following the proper rules. And now, a chaver who dies, still his wife and his children as household they continue in their father's ways and in their husband's ways, and therefore they are trustworthy regarding teruman, maaser, and kosher, whatever they do. They follow the halacha correctly. And so to a courtyard where they sell techelet, there will be a courtyard that was owned by, run by a certain family, and if they knew that everybody chipped in and they made the techelet, and if it was once trustworthy, you can assume that it is trustworthy until you find a reason to say it's disqualified. But as long as there once was a chaver there and someone trustworthy, you can assume that they're continuing the same practices. תנור בנן, אשת עם הארץ שנישאת לחבר, וכן ביתו של עם הארץ שנישאת לחבר, וכן עבדו של עם הארץ שנמכר לחבר, כולם צריכים לקבל דברי חברות. Another braita, someone who was married to an Ama'aretz, who's not careful with halachot. They do halachot basically, but they don't know so many of the details. And then she got divorced or widowed, and she married a chaver, or a daughter of an Ametz who married a chaver, or a servant of an Ama'aretz who was sold to a chaver. All these people have to formally accept the pact of being part of a friendship group of being a chaver. They have to agree that they're going to follow all the laws and strict standards of being a chaver. אבל אשת חבר שנישאת עם הארץ, וכן ביתו של חבר שנישאת עם הארץ, וכן עבדו של חבר שנמכר עם הארץ, אינם צריכים לקבל דברי חברות לכתחילה דברי רבי מאיר. But the other way around, they don't need to. If you have a woman who was married to a chaver, and then she was widowed or divorced, and then she married an am haaretz, we can assume that she will continue in her stringent ways. And also the daughter of a chaver, she grew up in the house with a father who was a chaver, and then she married an am haaretz. She's not going to follow his bad ways. She's going to continue to be scrupulous. And so to a servant of a chaver that was sold to an am haaretz, they do not have to accept upon themselves a commitment to follow all the laws of the group. Lechatechila. They can do it, but they don't have to, according to Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Afen tzrichin lekabel divrei chaverut lechatechila. Rabbi Yehuda says, no, lechatechila, they should, because now they're going with a new husband or a new master, and maybe they'll be pressured to not follow all the ways that they had before. When they were married to the chaver, then the chaver is watching over, making sure. But then they go to a new household, they might become accustomed to the new ways of the Am Haaretz. וכן היה רבי שמעון בן אלעזר אומר, מעשה באישה אחת שנישאת לחבר והייתה קושרת לו תפילין על ידו. נישאת למוכס, הייתה קושרת לו קשרי מוכס על ידו. And Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says, I know a story about a woman, when she was married to a chaver, she would help tie the tefillin onto her husband's arm. So she was very righteous. But then she got married to a tax collector. Tax collector in those days was the same as saying a mafia boss. Basically, they would work for the government and guarantee the government will collect taxes for you, and then they would extort people to take extra money for themselves. So not a great person. She was married to him, and she would also tie things on his arm, but not tefillin, but rather tax seals. This was like a seal, like a badge that showed that he was an official tax collector. Basically, he had authorized to steal from people, and so you see that although she was married to a chaver before that, but then when she was married to the lowlife, she ended up helping him in his lowlife career. Amarav, chavit asur bechotam echad, cham pag mutar bechotam echad. Rav says that the acronym represented by chavit, we'll see what that is prohibited with only one seal. You need two seals. In other words, if you transport it from a non-Jew and then someone brings it and delivers it, then it has to have two seals so that you know that on the way it didn't get switched for anything else. Whereas things that are represented by champag, rashet tevot, that as long as it has one seal, even though it came from a kosher source, but in the meantime it was carried over by non-Jews and it has one seal, that's sufficient. You don't need two seals for that because they're less likely that someone tampered with it. Okay, so what's the first one? That one seal is not enough. Chalav, basar, yayin, techelet. Milk, meat, wine, and techelet. These are expensive items, and there's a lot of incentive for someone to switch out the kosher one with a non-kosher one. And so they might even tamper with one seal and forge it in order to have financial benefit. But two seals is already very difficult to forge, and they wouldn't go through all that trouble. Asurim bechotam echad. So these are prohibited with only one seal. Chiltit morias pat givina mutarim bechotam echad. Chiltit, those small fish, and morias, fish stew that sometimes they put wine in, and bread and cheese, all these things are permitted with only one seal because although we're a little bit afraid that they might switch out one for the other, but these are not such high value items that someone would make a lot of money by switching one for the other, and therefore one seal is sufficient. These laws apply nowadays when you Uber Eats something or get something delivered from a kosher restaurant, and let's say it's meat, so then they make sure to seal it, and they wrap it again and put the tape on it, and you need a chainsaw to open it. There's a good reason for that. We want to make sure that if they're delivering to you a steak, and a kosher steak is more expensive than a non-kosher steak, we want to make sure that the delivery man didn't switch it out. And so you have the seals on it to make sure that it is in fact the same thing that was sent. Now we wonder, regarding bread, why come you don't need two seals and only need one seal? Because what are you so afraid of? The delivery guy, he's going to switch out, he has to have an incentive to switch it out. He's not doing it just to give something not kosher to a Jew. That's what they're not thinking about that. But rather maybe it's fresh bread that he's supposed to deliver, and he's going to switch it out for old bread. But then you'll know because you'll get the bread and you'll see this is stale bread and you were expecting hot, freshly baked bread. And so you'll know and then you'll call him out on it. If you ordered wheat bread, which is more quality, and he's going to switch it out for barley bread, which is less quality, and then he'll benefit financially from that. Also, it's easy to tell the difference between wheat and barley bread. And if they're exactly the same, well then, if there was no seal on it at all, then he might switch it out. Because he's hungry, so he eats this one that he's supposed to deliver, and then later on the road, he just buys something from a non-kosher vendor which is patakum, and so he's switching kosher for not kosher. So without a seal at all, maybe he'll switch it out. They look the same. But if there's one seal, he's not going to bother because it's the same price. It's not like he's getting financial benefit, much financial benefit from it. And so one seal will be sufficient to deter him from switching one for the other. And that explains why for bread, only one seal is sufficient. But for other items, where if there's a big financial gain for him to switch out one for the other, then he may tamper with one seal and he'll forge one seal. But two seals, that already is enough of a deterrent for meat and wine and the other items. Vedav Maishana Givina. Now, how come he said that cheese only needs one seal? Because people aren't going to bother to switch out one cheese for the other. Whether it's from a kosher place or a not kosher place, they're the same price, and so he's not going to switch it. Then we should apply the same thing to milk. How come he said that milk needs two seals? What's the difference? I mean, milk, one seal should be enough. Well, he's going to switch out this milk for another milk. It's all the same price. It's all the same quality. Amar Rav Kahana, pek chalav ayel chatichat dag she'en ba siman. Rav Kahana says, you're right. Take out the milk from the list of something that needs two seals. It doesn't need two seals. Instead, add in fish. A piece of fish that has no sign on it that is kosher. Some fish, you could, if it's whole, or you could see that it's a kosher fish. But let's say it's a piece that doesn't have a sign. So then you need two seals, and that was not mentioned in his list. Hainu basar, we asked, wait a second, in the list of the things that need two seals, we already had meat, and doesn't that include meat of an animal and meat of a fish? No, today gavne basar. No, in fact, these are two types of meat, and that's why Rav is listing them separately. Meat from an animal, that's basar, and meat from a fish, that is another one, and so those both need two seals. Ushmuel Amar, Bet asur bechotam echad, machag mutar bechotam echad. Shmuel has a different list, and he says that the acronym Bet Yud Taf, those are prohibited with only one seal. Not good enough. But machag, that's permitted with only one seal. Basar yayin techelet asurim bechotam echad. So wine, meat, wine, and techelet, those you can't send with just one seal. You need two seals. Morias chiltit gevina mutzim bechotam echad, and the mem chet gimel, that stands for morias, the fish stew, chiltit, those little fish, and cheese. You have to have one seal, but that's sufficient. Lishmel chatichat dag. Shen basiman hainu basar, today gavne basar la amrinan. And according to Shemuel, he would agree regarding the fish that one sign is not enough. A fish that has no sign, one seal is not enough because the same as meat. And he didn't bother listing it separately because when he said basar, he meant the two types of meat, animal meat and fish meat. And so that's why he really is in agreement with Rav before that both fish and animal meat need two signs, but Rav listed them separately and Shemuel listed them all together. Teno Rabbanan, en lochim yamach machag besuria, lo yain velo murias velo halav velo melach sal kondarit velo chiltit velo gebina ela min hamumche v'cholam im nitarech esel balabayit mutar. Braita teaches that one may not buy from a Jew in Syria the following items, even though the Jews in Syria kept kosher at home. And if you'd go to their home, that would be okay. But when they sold things in their stores, they would sell non-kosher items. And therefore, you can only buy from a Jew who's an expert with a good reputation and not just from any Jews. What are the items that you cannot buy? They're represented by the acronym Yamach Machag, which stands for wine or that fish stew or milk, and not this certain type of salt that we'll talk about soon, and chiltit, the little fish, and cheese. All these things only buy from a Jew who is trustworthy. But regarding all these items, if you go to a home of a Jew in Syria, that's permitted. They keep kosher at home, but in their stores, they sell non-kosher food. Mesaya led Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, Damar Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, Shiged lo ba'al habayit lebeto, mutar, maitama ba'al habayit ashabi ketera v'chal isura, v'chi meshagad le, memay dachal meshagad le. And this supports the statement of Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, who said that if someone from Syria sends something from his home to the home of another Jew, it's permitted. Why? He's sending to you. Maybe he sold it. Maybe he's sending it from his business. No. If he's sending it from his home, then at home he doesn't leave off the permitted and eat eat prohibited things. In other words, in the home, the Jew has only kosher food. And when he sends something, he's sending something that he would eat himself. So if he's sending a gift from his home, then it's permitted to accept it, and you can assume it's kosher. Only if you're buying something from his store, that you have to be careful and make sure he is a trustworthy person. Umelach salkondarit. Now, this type of salt, the Mishnah says, is prohibited. My melach salkondarit. What is it? Amar Rav Yehuda Mashema melach shekol salkondare romi ochlin ota. It's called this because the bakers of the Roman bakers eat it. That's why it's called that, and that's what it means. Salkondari is the bakers. Now, still, we don't know what's wrong with it. Tenor banan melach salkondarit shechora asura lebana mutet Rabbi Meir. Now, there's two opinions. Rabbi Meir says that this type of salt, if it's black, it's prohibited, but the white one is permitted. Rabbi Yehuda omer lebana asura shechora muteret. Rabbi Yehuda says the opposite. The white one is prohibited. The black one is permitted. Rabbi Yehuda ben Gamliel mishum. Rabbi Chanina ben Gamliel omer zo vezo asura. Rabbi Yehuda ben Gamliel says both the black and the white are both prohibited. We still don't know why. Amar Rabba bar Chana amar Rabbi Yochanan divrei omer levana asura kirbe dagim lebanim temeim me'oravin ba. Divrei omer shechora asura kirbe dagim shechorim temeim me'oravin ba. Rabbi Yochanan explains, according to the opinion that the white salt is prohibited, it's because the insides of white non-kosher fish are mixed into the salt. I guess you get the salt from the sea, and okay, you're getting it out of the sea, but that salt is not pure salt. There's also non-kosher parts that are mixed in with it. According to the other opinion that the black one is prohibited, it's because the insides of black non-kosher fish are mixed in with it, and that's why it's not kosher. According to the third opinion that both black and white salt are prohibited, it's because there's black fish and white fish who are not kosher, whose insides are mixed in with the salt. Amar Rabbi Abu Mishum Rabbi Yechanina ben Gamliel, Zaken echad haya b'shchunatenu, shaya machalik paneha b'shuman hazir. And Rabbi Abu said, named Rabbi Yechanina ben Gamliel, there was an elder in our town who would smooth the surface of this salt with pig fat. And so that's a different explanation of why this type of salt is prohibited. Hare elu asurim. The Mishnah has a conclusion formula that says all the things that we just mentioned on this list are prohibited to eat, but permitted to get benefit from. So the Gemara asks, why do we need this conclusion formula? These are extra words. It must be coming to exclude something else, that there are other things that are prohibited even from benefit. What are those things? According to Chizkiah, we saw in an earlier daf that if you have some pickled item and you don't know for sure if there's wine or vinegar in it, it's just the type of thing that usually you put wine and vinegar, that's what we're talking about, that's prohibited only to eat. But if you know for sure that the non-Jew put wine or vinegar in it, then it's prohibited to get benefit from. So that's what is excluding according to Chizkiah. But according to Rabbi Yochanan, he disagreed with Chizkiah about that law and didn't think that was prohibited for benefit. So according to Rabbi Yochanan, this line is coming to exclude the fish stew and cheese from bet unyaki. Those are prohibited even to get benefit from, according to Rabbi Meir. And so that's what is coming to exclude. And even though the Mishnah is stam, is anonymous, the anonymous Mishnah must be the opinion of Rabbi Meir, who says that these two items are prohibited even to get benefit from. Next Mishnah. And now, in contrast to the previous Mishnah, the following things one is permitted to eat, certainly to get benefit from, even though it comes from a non-Jew. Milk that a non-Jew prepared, he milked the cow, but a Jew was watching him. That's okay, as opposed to the previous one where a Jew was not watching him. V'had devash, and honey, bee honey is permitted, even though bees themselves are prohibited, but we're not actually eating the bee or any part of the bee, but rather the idea is that the bee goes and takes the pollen and just processes it and turns it into honey and deposits it. But it doesn't go through the bee's regular digestive system, and therefore, even though it comes from a bee, this is a kosher substance. והדב דבניות, אף על פי שמנטפין, אין בהם משום הכשר משקה. And grape clusters, even though they are dripping with grape juice, nevertheless, they are permitted. The idea is that one might have thought that since these grape clusters are dripping grape juice, and so you might have thought that they're coming from a non-Jew, and so maybe this is grape juice or wine that comes from a non-Jew, and that would make it prohibited. That's what you might have thought. So this comes to teach not so, because we're going to compare the laws of Yayin Nesech to the laws of Hechsher. The law is that fruit, if it's on the vine, cannot become tameh. Even if after you take it off the vine or cut it, it still cannot become tameh until it gets wet with one of 7 liquids. Wine is one of the 7 liquids. It has to get wet, and it has to be such that the owner wants it to get wet. Once it gets wet, then if it touches something tameh, then it can become tameh. Before that, it's not susceptible to becoming tameh. So the law regarding these grape clusters is that even if it's dripping juice, nevertheless, the owner does not yet want the juice to come out. Eventually, he's going to bring it to the press, and then he's going to turn it into grape juice and into wine. But right now, he'd rather it was not dripping. So since he doesn't want that juice to come out, it does not make the grapes susceptible to tum'ah. We borrow that idea for the same law here, that the owner, the non-Jewish owner, he's not considering this juice as coming out to be wine that he's going to go and serve to his idol. This is just juice that's coming out because they're ripe and he's moving them around, but he'd rather it not come out. It's just a byproduct. And therefore you don't have to worry that he is thinking of and serving this juice to his idol, and therefore it's permitted. The grapes are permitted, even though there is grape juice that's dripping out of them. And pickled items that people usually do not put oil and vinegar when they pickle those items, so then you don't have to worry that the non-Jew put wine or vinegar in it that would make it not kosher. V'tarit she'ena tirufa, a tarit fish that's not minced. The tarit fish by itself is kosher. The problem in the previous Mishnah is that it's minced, and then he might add in parts of non-kosher fish. But here, it's not minced, so that you could tell it's a whole piece, and I know it's from a kosher fish. Vesir sheyesh ba daga, brine that has a fish in it, ve'aleh shel chiltit, a whole leaf of chiltit. The chiltit is just a plant, it's just an herb, so obviously that's okay. If you cut it up into small slivers, then the problem is that the knife imparts non-kosher grease into it. But if it's not cut, it's okay. Vezete gelus kaot hamegul galin, rolled olive cakes. You don't have to worry that the non-Jew put wine in it. Rabbi Yosef omer hashalachin asurin. Rabbi Yosef says overripe olives are prohibited. The Gemara will talk about why. Hachagavim abaim min haselula asurin min haftek mutarin. Grasshoppers that come from the salesman's basket are prohibited, but from the storeroom are permitted. We're talking about kosher grasshoppers, but when they're in the salesman's basket, he puts wine on them to make them look nice and to keep them fresh, and so that wine is not going to make it prohibited. But if they're in the storeroom, then that's okay. He doesn't put wine in on the grasshoppers that are in the storeroom. V'chen litruma, that distinction also applies to tiruma, which the Gemara will explain further on a future daf. Gemara, Tanena lehade tanur banan. Yoshev yisrael besad idro shel goy, vegoy cholev umebilo ve'eno choshesh. We learned a baraita that says if a Jew is sitting next to the flock of a non-Jew, and the non-Jew is milking the goats, and the non-Jew brings the milk to the Jew that's sitting there, that's permitted, there's no problem. Let's analyze this baraita. Hechi dameh, what exactly is the case? Let's say the non-Jew has only goats, which are kosher, in his flock, and he has no non-kosher animals. Then obviously that would be okay. There's nothing to worry about. There's no way he could have gotten any non-kosher milk. So we wouldn't have to even say that he's there to be watching. Now, if he has non-kosher animals also in the flock, then why is it permitted? And the Jew's just sitting there. That means he's not watching him 100% of the time. He's just sitting nearby. He's glancing over once in a while. So maybe while the Jew is not looking, the non-Jew might go and milk the non-kosher animal and mix it in. So then why is it permitted? And so the answer is Lo'olam Di'ika Davar Tameh. So in fact, we're talking about a case where there are non-kosher animals also mixed in with the goats and the cows in the flock. When the Jew stands up, he can see what the non-Jew is doing. When he sits down, then he can't see. But he can decide to stand up anytime. This is similar to a mashgiach who's not there all the time watching, but who pops in every so often, and anytime he wants to, he can surprise the non-Jew and be there. So it's a mashgiach that's there sometimes. Mahu detema kevan diatib la chazile dechush dilma maiter ma'arev be kamash malan kevan dechi ka'eh chazele irtu temiritat vela mi'arav be. I might have thought that since when the Jew is sitting down, he can't see what the non-Jew is doing, so we should be afraid that at those moments the non-Jew will look over, oh look, he's sitting down, so he's going to mix in some non-kosher milk into the pail that he's bringing to the Jew. That's what we might have thought that we prohibited. And therefore this Baraita comes to teach that no, since the Jew is sitting there and he might stand up at any time and look, so he's going to be fearful and he's not going to mix anything non-kosher into it. So this is a very important halacha. It shows that this law about the milk that comes from non-Jews is prohibited is not an across-the-board gezerah like it was for cheese. A cheese is, even if it's just across the board, it doesn't matter what the reason is. We had 7 different reasons for a cheese, and we don't even know which one it is, and the rabbis didn't even want to tell the reason. So it means that there's no single reason, it's just a gezerah. But here, it's just based on a reality. If there's nobody watching, then we have to be afraid that the non-Jew mixes the non-kosher milk into the kosher milk. But if you know there's only kosher animals in the flock, then you don't need a Jew to be watching it. The non-Jew can go and milk the milk and bring it over, and that's okay. And even if he has non-kosher animals, as long as there is the possibility that the Jew will stand up and see it, even if he's not actually watching all the time, that's enough psychologically that to make the non-Jew fearful of mixing it in. And so this is the basis of Rabbi Moshe Feinstein's ruling that as long as the government is watching and requiring that the milk factories only put cow milk and don't mix in anything else, that's enough of a fear factor that they're not going to. So you see a fundamental difference between areas of halacha where there's an absolute gezerah that's not dependent on the reason, that's just that's the way it is and you can't change it. There are many laws like that, but there are other laws that it's not an official gezerah across the board, but rather a law that's dependent on the situation. And so the Gemara right there teaches that milk depends on the details of the situation. Ve'hadevash, the Mishnah taught that honey that's prepared by non-Jews, a Jew can go ahead and eat it. The Gemara will explain. Devash lemay nechushla. Why is it permitted? Well, what are you worried about? Are you worried that the non-Jew is going to mix wine into it? Wine ruins their honey, so he's not going to ruin his own honey. Are you afraid that the non-Jew cooks it? But that's okay also, because honey can be eaten raw, and anything that you can eat raw, you can also eat if it's cooked by non-Jews. If you're worried about the purging of the pots that the non-Jew used, because he had to use them before for non-kosher, and now he's cooking the honey in those same pots, that's also okay, because by the time he uses it to cook the honey, the taste that was in it from the last meal the day before is going to give a detrimental taste, and a detrimental taste is permitted, and that's why the Mishnah says there's nothing to worry about regarding honey. And the Mishnah taught that grape clusters, even though they're dripping juice, but that's okay. That juice is something that the owner doesn't want to come out, is not considering it wine, so we don't consider it wine either for the law of Yayin Nesech. Urmin hi habosel lagat shamay omer huchshar, Hillel omer lo huchshar, v'od Hillel le shamay. Hold on, we have a Baraita that says if someone has grapes that he's bringing to the press, he's harvesting grapes to bring them to the press, and he's going to crush them. And in the meantime, while he's carrying them to the press, there's some juice that's coming out because they are so ripe. Shammai says that juice is considered wine, and a guy wants it to get wet. Maybe it's good that it be a little wet before it goes into the press, and so he wants it to get wet, and therefore it does make it susceptible to tum'ah. Hillel said no, it's not susceptible to tum'ah. He doesn't want it to come out yet. It's just liquid. It's not something that he wants it for it to get wet, and therefore the grapes are not susceptible to tum'ah. But after they discussed it, Hillel changed his mind and agreed to Shammai, which means the bottom line is that juice that's coming out of the grapes is susceptible to tum'ah, does make the grapes susceptible to tum'ah. And therefore, that goes against our Mishnah, because the Mishnah said that the juice that comes out of the grapes does not make them susceptible to tum'ah. So we have a contradiction, and the answer is hatam kaba'el lemeshkeh, hachala kaba'el lemeshkeh. They're talking about different situations. When you're bringing it right to the press, right before, it's good to be a little wet. It makes the process better, and so there he wants it to get wet. Whereas the Mishnah is talking about a case where he's not bringing it to the press right away, and any juice that comes out is just going to be lost, and he doesn't want it to get wet. And since he doesn't want it to get wet, we don't consider it wine, not for hechsher and not for the law of yayin nesech, so it's permitted to take those grapes from the non-Jews. V'tarit she'ena terufa. A tarit fish that's not minced. You can see it, and you can see that it's kosher. What do you call it that it's not minced? Does it mean not cut at all? The answer is no, it can be cut, but as long as the head and the spine are recognizable, then you can see, oh, that's a tarit fish. But if you cut those off, then you can't tell what kind of fish it is. And the Mishnah mentioned that if you have fish brine that has a kilbit fish in it, then that's an indicator that the brine was made only from kosher fish. So what does that mean? We explained, it's any time that there's either one kilbit fish or two kilbit fish that are floating in it. That's an indication that it's made from all kosher fish. Now we ask, if one kilbit fish makes it permitted, then do you have to say two? Why does it bother saying one or two? There's no contradiction. It depends. If it's an open barrel, then you need two fish in it, because who knows how the fish got in there? Maybe just one happened to get in there, or so you need two to show, oh, it's purposeful that there's two in it. But if it's a sealed barrel and there's a kilbit fish in it, then that's sufficient to show that the fish brine maker put that little fish in on purpose. It's a kosher fish to show that it is kosher. But if it's open, then one fish maybe just happened to fall in there. So you need two fishes to indicate that it is kosher. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen ve'amen.